The platform clock at the station was stuck on the wrong time, its hands frozen between hours. Commuters had stopped noticing long ago, but that afternoon it seemed almost symbolic when a dog crumpled just beneath it, his legs folding without. Sound. He was not old, but exhaustion had stripped him of his age. His ribs rose and fell shallowly as if each breath was a negotiation, his flank pressed against the cold cement. People hurried around him at first, bags dragging, coats brushing, eyes fixed on departing trains. The indifference was ordinary, almost expected, until one man slowed. The man was called Martin, a retired ticket clerk who had once walked these same platforms in uniform. He hadn't meant to stop, but the sight unsettled him. The way the dogs, chest lifted, then stilled too long, as though the heart beneath might simply forget to go on. Kneeling was difficult for Martin. His knees resisted with age, but he lowered himself anyway and set his hand near the animal's collar, not touching, just near enough to feel the warmth of a trembling pulse. The dog's eyes flickered open, brown, steady, not pleading, only acknowledging. Behind them, a woman carrying a bag of oranges paused. One orange slipped from the netted sack, rolled across the platform, and bumped against the dog's paw. She bent down to retrieve it, then stayed. Her name was Lena, though Martin would only learn that later. For now, she stood in silence, her breath misting in the late afternoon chill. The train announcements blurred above them, a voice too loud. For the scene at their feet, the collar was worn leather, stained dark where years of weather had seeped through. It was not the kind of collar sold cheaply in station markets. It had history, softened by use. Martin's fingers, stiff but deliberate, brushed against a small metallic weight hidden under the fold. A clasp, then something flat and unfamiliar, pressed close to the dog's skin. The dog stirred weakly at the touch, a sound escaping his throat. Not a bark, not a whimper, but something caught between memory and warning. The commuters who still hurried by lifted their pace, unwilling to be drawn into the gravity of the moment. Only Martin and the woman remained, leaning closer, their shadows lengthening on the tiled floor as the sun tilted behind the station roof. Lena set her bag down. One of the oranges burst open from the fall, its scent sharp and sweet in the cooling air. She tore a wedge and placed it carefully aside as if the dog might eat, though Martin shook his head almost imperceptibly. The animal needed more than fruit. What he carried in his silence was heavier than hunger. When Martin finally eased the collar around, he found a small pouch tucked in the lining. Not a tag with a name, not the expected brass circle jingling with numbers, but something deliberate and hidden. His fingers hesitated, the rough edge of the pouch pressing into his palm. He could feel the woman's gaze steady on him, waiting, unspoken questions tightening the space between them. The dog's breathing quickened suddenly, as though aware that the secret of his collar was being disturbed. His eyes closed again, lashes trembling against his cheek. The station clock above remained frozen, its hands unmoving, yet time around them seemed to lean forward, expectant. Martin swallowed against the dry knot in his throat and slipped the pouch free. The leather unfolded with a quiet resistance. Inside lay a slip of folded paper, damp at the corners, worn soft from years pressed against fur. Martin glanced at Lena, then opened it halfway before stopping, the faint script visible only in fragments under the fading light. A train's whistle broke through the air, rattling the rails, and the dog twitched as though pulled by it. Martin did not read aloud. His lips pressed together, his eyes narrowing not in disbelief but in recognition of something he did not yet share. Lena bent closer, her voice low, the first words spoken since they had crouched beside the animal. "What is it?" she asked. Martin closed the pouch, fingers tightening around it. He looked down at the dog, still unmoving on the cement, then back at her. "It's not what I expected," he said quietly, and the station swallowed the rest of his words, leaving only the hush of waiting passengers, the faint citrus scent of the broken orange, and the mystery of what message an abandoned dog might carry in silence. The whistle faded into distance, leaving the platform briefly suspended in a silence more piercing than sound. Martin still held the folded slip in his hand, the paper trembling faintly though his fingers were steady. The dog's breathing grew shallower, a faint shudder with each rise of his chest. Lena crouched lower, her knees nearly touching the cement, and brushed the loose hair from the animal's eyes. She did not ask again what the paper contained. The restraint in her silence felt heavier than words. The overhead lights flickered on, throwing a pale glow over the station. Shadows grew longer and sharper, and for the first time Martin noticed the dampness spreading beneath the dog's side. It was not water from the earlier drizzle, but a stain darkening the concrete, seeping outward in slow defiance of stillness. He pressed his palm carefully against the animal's ribs, and it came away with the faint sheen of blood. The injury had been hidden by fur and by the simple refusal of the dog to show weakness until collapse made it impossible. Lena inhaled sharply but did not move away. Instead, she reached for the orange segment she had left earlier, her hand shaking as if the act of offering something, anything, might steady her. The dog turned his head faintly, his tongue brushing against the fruit, but retreating again. Hunger was not the battle here. Something older and more private weighed between his collar and his wound. The station air cooled as the evening deepened, carrying with it the metallic scent of iron rails and damp stone. A train roared through without stopping, scattering wind. Across the platform, tugging at coats and hair. In that rush of sound, Martin finally unfolded the slip fully. His eyes moved over the faded ink, his brows pulling together in disbelief. It was not an address, not a name or plea for help, but a short string of numbers, an arrangement precise enough to mean coordinates. He lowered the slip so Lena could see. Her lips parted, her face reflecting confusion first, then something closer to dread. She touched the edge of the paper gently, careful not to smudge what time had already worn thin. The numbers were etched into both their minds now, an irreversible mark of curiosity and responsibility. The dog stirred again, this time with more urgency, his paw dragging slightly against the cement as though trying to push himself upright. His body failed him, but the intention was unmistakable. Movement towards something, not away. Martin and Lena both leaned closer, instinctively aligning themselves with his faltering direction. The station, once indifferent, began to feel intrusive. Commuters glanced now, some slowing, a few stopping altogether. Murmurs rippled through the cluster, not out of concern but out of curiosity sharpened by unease. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at the dog with wide eyes, but she drew him away quickly, muttering about dirt and sickness. The crowd thinned again, leaving Martin and Lena exposed in their vigil. Martin lifted the pouch once more, weighing it in his palm. The coordinates lingered in his mind like a quiet drumbeat. He remembered long nights decades ago, when freight schedules carried hidden codes and maps determined the rhythm of rails. But this was not railway work. It felt personal, secretive, perhaps desperate. The dog's collapse was not random. A drop of rain struck the concrete, then another. The drizzle began without warning, subtle and persistent, coating the platform in a sheen that reflected the lights above. It mirrored the mood tightening between the three of them, the man, the woman, and the wounded animal bound by something. Unnamed. Lena slipped off her scarf, folding it once and pressing it lightly against the dog's side. The gesture was instinctive, unspoken. Her hand lingered there, steady despite the warmth seeping through the fabric. Martin met her eyes only. Briefly, but in that exchange something shifted. Fear gave way to recognition, and recognition to a quiet pact. Neither had asked for this, yet both knew they were now drawn into it. The dog's breathing hitched, then steadied, shallow but determined. He blinked once, gaze fixed on the slip still clutched in Martin's hand. His eyes held not panic but insistence, as though the weight of his journey lay not in survival but in the message delivered. A final train for the evening slid into the station, brakes screeching, carriages rattling the ground beneath them. People pressed forward to board, voices rising, footsteps pounding. But here, at the quiet edge of the platform, three figures remained still against the storm of movement. The paper fluttered in Martin's hand as the wind pushed harder, and, for an instant, he considered slipping it back into the collar, pretending none of it had touched them. He did not. Instead, he folded it carefully and slid it into his pocket, a decision that could not be undone. The drizzle thickened into rain, masking the dark stain spreading beneath the dog. Lena's scarf grew heavy with it, but she did not lift her hand. The station lights hummed above, unchanging, indifferent. Somewhere beyond the rain and steel, the coordinates waited, promising answers neither of them had sought but both could no longer ignore. The train had already pulled away, leaving the platform strangely hollow, as though sound itself had gone with it. The dog lay motionless, his collar slackened from Martin's touch, his breaths uneven. Lena crouched lower, pressing her palm just above his flank, the warmth there startling in its fragility. She had known animals in passing, stray cats that skirted alleys, tethered dogs in backyards, but never one collapsing between travelers' shoes, carrying something so deliberately hidden against its chest. The paper Martin had slipped back into the pouch weighed on him. He had not spoken of the words, but the lines he glimpsed had unsettled him. They were not a name or an address, not a plea for return. They carried instead the shape of a sentence that did not belong in a collar at all. He folded his hand tightly. Over it, his thumb pressing the crease as if silence could keep the meaning from escaping. Around them, the air shifted. A drizzle began, light enough to feel like mist, yet sharp in its timing, as though the sky had chosen this moment to thin the distance between earth and cloud. The scent of wet iron lifted from the tracks. Lena pulled her coat tighter but did not move away. She noticed Martin's posture, shoulders drawn, eyes avoiding hers, his silence a refusal as much as a hesitation. The dog stirred then, a sudden shudder traveling through his body, his foreleg jerked weakly, paw scraping against. The burst orange. Juice streaked the concrete in a pattern that looked almost like veins branching outward. Lena caught his paw gently, not to restrain, but to steady, and in the contact she felt the tremor of exhaustion that seemed too great for one body to hold. When Martin finally knelt again, he did so slowly, almost as though the act carried its own consequence. He slid 2 fingers beneath the dog's jaw, searching for the rhythm of a pulse. It was there, irregular, fragile, but insistent. He exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Yet, when his hand withdrew, his fingers trembled in a way that betrayed the quiet dread he carried. Another train approached in the distance, its rumble low and growing. The vibrations carried through the platform into the animal's chest, causing him to stir again. His eyes half opened, but the gaze did not settle on them. It drifted beyond, toward the tunnel's mouth, as though searching for something that should have been there. For the first time, Lena felt the possibility that he was not simply lost or abandoned. He was waiting, or perhaps remembering. The drizzle thickened, drops pattering softly on the station roof. Commuters gathered closer to the walls, muttering about the weather, yet still avoiding the scene unfolding at their feet. A boy of perhaps 10 slowed his step and stared openly at the dog before his mother pulled him onward. The child's curiosity, unfiltered, made the moment sharper. How easily the world could choose to look away. Martin pressed the pouch into his pocket. Lena noticed, her brow tightening, but she said nothing. The choice was his, yet the silence between them grew heavier with it. She reached for her bag, tore free another orange, and this time peeled it fully, setting the slices carefully near the dog. Not for him to eat. She seemed to know he wouldn't, but as if the act itself offered companionship, something gentle in the cold drizzle. The animal shifted once more, his breathing rougher now, a faint rasp breaking through. Martin leaned closer, and as he did, the collar slipped further down, revealing a raw patch of skin rubbed bare beneath the leather. The sight stilled him. This was no accident, no brief disappearance of a household pet. The dog had carried this burden across more than distance. It had worn him down into silence. For the first time, Martin met Lena's eyes. His expression carried no clarity, only the unease of someone who knew the moment had crossed a line. Whatever words were written in that folded paper, they belonged not to a lost dog's story but to something larger, something that now bound them both to its keeping. A whistle cut through the air again, but softer, echoing from the far side of the station where a freight line ran parallel. The sound was distorted, almost mournful. The dog lifted his head weakly at it, ears twitching with the effort, then let it fall back onto the cement. His chest heaved once, twice before settling into an irregular rhythm. The drizzle darkened the tiles, spreading shadows outward. Martin's hand tightened in his pocket, the paper pressing into his palm once more. He had not chosen to be keeper of it, yet he already was. Lena's hand remained near the dog's paw, not holding, not releasing, and for a long moment the platform seemed suspended between what they thought they knew and what the dog had silently carried here. The paper trembled in Martin's hand, though not from the breeze. The platform had thinned as dusk settled in, a chalky half-light coating the tiled floor, muting the edges of everything. The dog remained still, but not in surrender. His shallow breaths came sharper now, each one as if it tested how much longer his body would agree to carry him. Lena had lowered herself to sit on the edge of the cement, oranges forgotten at her side. Her posture was not pity, but waiting, her gaze fixed on the dog's collar as if the metal clasp itself might confess. She did not press Martin for answers again. Her silence drew more from him than questions could. When Martin finally unfolded the note fully, he found the script jagged, uneven, not the neat hand of instruction or a name tag for lost pets, but hurried words, darkened at the seams where the ink had bled. He read the first line once, then twice. The second line bent sharply across the fold, making it hard to piece together. His lips parted, yet he said nothing. Instead, he lowered the note into his lap, his shoulders curving inward as if protecting something fragile. A sound drew them both, low, rough, coming not from the dog but from across the tracks. A second dog had emerged at the far end of the platform, ribs tight under patchy fur, eyes catching what little light remained. He didn't move toward them but stood fixed, tail stiff, as though he recognized the one collapsed on the ground. His posture carried neither welcome nor threat, only the kind of alertness born of familiarity. The dog at Martin's feet stirred. Faintly, one paw dragging against the floor, nails clicking once before resting again. His ears twitched toward the newcomer. For a brief second, his eyes opened, not in fear, not in plea, but in recognition. The faintest growl slipped through his throat, more memory than sound. Rain began in the faintest drizzle, each drop darkening the cement like slow ink stains. It softened the air, blurred the edges of the station's rusted beams, and coated the collar until the leather shone. Martin slipped the paper back into its pouch and fastened the clasp again. He did it without hesitation this time, as if the note belonged hidden, not read aloud. The second dog moved closer along the opposite track but stopped short at the gravel edge, his head lowered, ears drawn back, not daring the rails. There was no sound now but the steady patter of rain and the far-off hum of a delayed train. The scene pressed in with its stillness, as though waiting for a decision from someone who was not ready to make one. Lena lifted her scarf and spread it across, the collapsed dog's body shielding him from the wet. The gesture was instinctive, quiet, without announcement. The animal did not resist. His breath warmed the cloth faintly, fogging the fibers. She did not look at Martin, nor he at her. Their focus remained on the creature that carried more weight, in his silence, than they yet understood. A sudden flicker of light passed along the rails, headlamps in the distance, their glow bouncing in the mist. The approaching train stirred the air, rattling the boards beneath them. Martin leaned forward, uncertain whether the vibration would rouse or startle the dog. The animal flinched but did not rise. His paw stretched forward unconsciously, grazing the edge of the broken orange that still lay nearby. The second dog on the far side shifted, pacing with restless urgency, his eyes fixed on the pouch now hidden once more against the collar. He barked once, a sharp, singular sound that startled the waiting air. It wasn't a call of aggression, but something else: recognition, insistence, maybe even warning. His voice echoed off the hollow walls before silence swallowed it again. Martin's hand remained on the collapsed dog's neck, fingers resting on the thready pulse. The pouch pressed against his palm beneath the fur, its damp weight undeniable. He thought of unfolding the note again, but something in the other dog's bark held him back, as if reading further now would alter more than he was ready to accept. The train thundered closer, rushing into the station, its brakes shrieking against the rails. Passengers stirred around them once more, feet scuffing, voices rising. But at the center of the noise, their small circle remained unchanged. One dog fading, another waiting, two strangers caught in between. When the cars screeched to a halt and the doors opened, the second dog vanished back into the shadows. His departure was silent, sudden, as if he had only come to confirm something before disappearing again. Martin watched the space he had occupied, a hollow unease tightening in his chest. The dog at his feet shivered once, a ripple that passed through his entire frame, then settled. Martin drew the scarf closer around him, his jaw set, rain dripping from his hairline into his eyes. He did not speak. He only knew, with a certainty that deepened like the storm rolling in, that the note in the collar was not just an answer, but a threshold, and he had already crossed it by opening it once. The rain eased by the time the train pulled out again, leaving the platform hushed, washed clean of its earlier noise. Water pooled in the grooves between tiles, reflecting the dim station lights. Martin remained on the ground beside the dog, his hand still at the collar, feeling the faint rise and fall beneath fur. The scarf lay soaked now, but it shielded enough to keep the trembling animal from the full weight of the weather. Lena had not moved either. She sat quietly, her oranges untouched, her gaze lowered to the wet paper pouch that seemed heavier for what it carried. The words Martin had read were not instructions or a plea for rescue. They were a farewell, penned in a faltering hand, a brief note to whoever found the dog, asking that he not be abandoned again. It spoke of years lived in silence, of a companion whose presence had been the only steady rhythm in a life otherwise unmoored. The lines were jagged because they had been written in haste, perhaps even in pain, but their meaning was clear. The collar was not simply an identifier. It was a bond, carried forward even as the hand that once fastened it had fallen still. The dog shifted, eyes opening just enough to search, not for comfort, but for recognition. Martin did not claim to offer it. Instead, he rested the pouch back against the fur, fastening the collar in its place. The act was less about saving than about returning something to where it belonged. Lena touched the scarf once, smoothing its edge across the dog's flank, then drew her hand away, leaving the fabric to absorb the night air. Beyond the platform, the second dog did not return. His absence left a hollow in the scene, a reminder that bonds between animals often carried meanings humans could only guess at. Perhaps he had come to see his companion one last time, perhaps to bear witness. His silence now carried as much weight as his single bark had moments before. The rain left the air heavy with iron and stone, scents that lingered long after the clouds broke. Martin straightened with difficulty, his joints protesting, but he kept his palm against the dog's side. The breathing beneath was shallow but steady enough to mark the passing minutes. He realized then that his role was not to change the animal's fate, but to keep it from unfolding in anonymity. The note had asked for nothing more. Lena rose and gathered her things, pausing before lifting her bag. She glanced once toward Martin, her expression neither expectant nor resigned, simply open. No words passed between them. She left one orange on the ground beside the scarf, a gesture small enough to be overlooked by anyone else. Then she stepped away, her footsteps vanishing into the softened echoes of the station. Martin stayed. He remained until the rain turned to mist, and the station clock above, though broken, seemed almost to acknowledge the hour. He did not know if the dog would rise again, or if the stillness that pressed closer was the last. What he did know was that the animal had been seen, carried, and named in silence. The collar, damp against his hand, bore the weight of that truth. When Martin finally stood, he left the scarf draped across the body, the pouch fastened tight, the orange a bright circle against the dull cement. He stepped back, watching once more the shallow breaths, then let his gaze drift beyond, to the rails stretching into mist, to the faint tremor of leaves stirred by the first dry wind after rain. The station emptied. The puddles reflected nothing but dim light. Somewhere beyond the tracks, another dog's steps faded into silence, and on the wet stone, the collar remained, its quiet weight carrying a memory that no longer asked to be answered, only to be witnessed.